Okay, we're going to continue the chassis assembly by building the left frame plate. We're going to combine the radio tray and gyro tray, which we built in a previous step, with the left frame part, some frame spacers, and the fuel tank retainer offsets. For this step, you'll need a medium-sized Phillips screwdriver, a 2.5mm hex driver, and either a 5mm wrench, open end, or you could use pliers, as well as some blue thread lock. Okay, here's where the offsets or the standoffs go for the fuel tank retainer. They thread into two PEM nuts in the front part of the frame. On the very front there's two PEM nuts. You want to use the lower one. This is where you need the 5mm wrench. There's flats on these. You can engage it with the wrench, tighten it up. You can fully tighten this with thread lock because these are permanent positions and we won't need to adjust it. Okay, here you can see where the frame spacers go. Mounts just behind where the main shaft would be, just above the tail boom supports, and just below the fuel tank. These mount in with M3x8 bolts. They're standard socket heads. Install them with blue thread lock. If for some reason you can't get them tight, the spacers have flats on them. You can either use pliers or a 7mm wrench. Fits perfectly. First, we're going to assemble the upper bearing block. An easy way to identify it is it's got three M3 button heads on the bottom that actually retain the bearing in here. Another little clue is the two holes in the front aren't threaded. So what we're going to do is install the servo post to it, and it's directional in a couple of ways. There's an indentation here where the anti-rotation guide goes, and also if you look close you can see the edges are flat on one side and more round on the other. The round edges actually go up. Also, there's a separate plate that can be installed between these two. If you're using JR or other servos that are fairly tall, you can put it in there, which spaces the servos back a little bit. It'll help you get the alignment correct on the linkages, which are going to come up in a later step. And the M3x12 socket heads are what go here. And you can install these with thread lock and fully tighten them because this is not going to, the alignment of this is not going to change and doesn't need to move later for any sort of adjustment. When you're done, this is what you've got. Okay, now we're going to assemble a middle bearing block. Again, you can identify it because it doesn't have the retaining bolts around the bearing, and the holes in the front here are threaded. And take the servo post again. Remember the rounded edges. On the middle bearing, they actually go down. The wider square side is going to go up because this is going to be the bottom of the servos. If you've got JR servos or something that's taller, there's a plate that can be installed between these two. I use Futaba servos, so I'm not going to need that. The M3x12 bolts thread into this together with thread lock. You can go ahead and fully tighten them because this isn't going to require any further adjustment. The final bearing block, which is for the bottom, doesn't require assembly. It's ready to go. This will be the orientation that it gets mounted in. The bearing blocks are connected by a carbon plate that basically is a stiffener. This can be installed two ways. It can be installed after the bearing blocks are in the frame, or it can be lightly installed initially and then tightened up later. Okay, here's how it looks when the brace is installed. At this point it's not tight because we're going to reposition and tighten this once these blocks are installed in the frame. Okay, first thing we're going to do is install the lower bearing block. Again, the raised side is going to go up. It's going to be installed in these two elongated bolt holes. We're going to use M3x8 socket head bolts. You do not want to thread lock or tighten these at this point because we're going to adjust them a little bit later in the assembly when we put the main shaft and the constant drive or the main gear in. So at this point you just want to snug these down loosely so this can move. Alright, now we're going to take the main bearing blocks that we assembled a little earlier, and they're going to slide in basically just like this into that position on the frame. We're going to use M3x6 socket heads. You're going to need 6 of them. Alright, here you can see the bearing blocks in place. Again, they go in with 6 M3x6 socket head bolts. I'm not going to fully tighten these just yet. I do have thread lock on this. The reason I'm not going to tighten them yet is I'm going to do a final alignment with the main shaft. Slide it through all 3 of these. And then I can go ahead and tighten up. I can fully tighten all of these bolts. Can also tighten up the 4 bolts that hold the bearing block support in place. These need blue thread lock on them. Can go ahead and fully tighten them, because this isn't going to require any further adjustment. Okay, at this point everything's lined up. Shaft moves very smoothly. Again, this block is still loose.